End of COP28 here, and there is no better time to get more conversation flowing on what I think we all find to be one of, if not the most important topic we should be talking about here, which is climate justice. And I'm not going to yammer on quite yet. I'm just going to introduce everybody, and we will get right into it. So just to give a little bit more context about who's here, my name is Russell, and I am a youth delegate of We Are Family Foundation, and I'm also a queer environmentalist, so climate justice is something very close to me and to my practice of environmentalism. Over here, I have Larissa, who is an executive director of the Brazilian youth-led climate organization Engaja Mundo. Over there, we've got Disha, who is an executive director, or who's a founder of Fridays for Future India and a youth climate activist there. And finally, we have Umazi, who is an indigenous artivist and also the youngest leadership council member of Kaya Duruma, which is a forest sanctuary and also a World Heritage Site on the Kenyan coast. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm feeling out of my league with this panel, but I'll just start right away by saying that climate justice is a diverse and sometimes to many people a very confusing topic, and one that we kind of want to start by just defining for you. And so in all of your words, I can start with you, Larissa. Give us your definition of climate justice.
So, hello everybody. Thanks so much for coming. I was thinking a lot about this question, and for me, when we talk about climate justice, is actually to talk about the urgent necessity to bring intersectionality to the conversation on what it means to open and talk about the different layers that somehow need to take into consideration when we're thinking about how to face the climate crisis. So for me, that's it.
Thank you. Disha?
Um, Sorry. I think for me, climate justice is remembering that we are not separate from nature, that we are a part of nature, and nature is extensions of us. And it's really important for us to remember that to attain justice for both ourselves and the planet.
And Umazi?
Yes, and just very similar to what Disha says, I think climate justice for me is embracing your spiritual nature in nature. And I know it sounds weird to humanize nature because nature is alive, right? And human beings, we tend to think of ourselves as like the only living things in this world. So I believe climate justice involves us humanizing nature in ways that we can see ourselves in nature.
I think something that really comes through in all of these responses, and also in just the conversations that I've been having with other youth activists here at COP28, is that the youth perspective on climate justice is that it isn't topical. It isn't something that gets a committee or a single position or can be viewed kind of separate from the rest. It's actually something that is foundational to all of the climate challenges that we're seeing, and therefore must be to all of the solutions that we're building as well. Within that, I think that the practice of climate justice really takes form, takes shape, and takes meaning through the work that you all do to actually practice climate justice. So in reverse order, starting with Umazi, can you just speak to an example of how you've brought climate justice into your own environmental work?
Sure. I always like to bring it back to mindfulness and self-awareness. What's the first thing that you do when you wake up in the morning? Do you run and grab your phone, or do you take a moment to take a deep breath, appreciate the oxygen going through your lungs, and then, just bringing awareness to that? So I really believe that it starts with self. It starts with you being mindful of how you interact with nature every day in the most simple ways that we take for granted. And then are you able to take those moments and those feelings and channel them into bigger impact and actions that I want to say affect more complex things? So for me, just being very mindful, being very intentional are ways in which I bring climate justice. I believe I bring climate justice into my work.
Disha?
I think for me, it's working with grassroots communities, especially in my local state, which is Karnataka in India, and also communities across India. I've learned so much from them, and they are what inspire me to continue doing what I do. And India has such a rich environmental history, and they are awe-inspiring. We've had centuries, not centuries, decades of people who fought for rivers, who fought for forests, and that to me is what climate justice is: community and people coming together to save each other and to save the home we all love and share.
Yeah, to add to that, because when I think about climate justice, for me it's always about how do we go from individual work to collective work and how we integrate these both things. And as you presented me, I am one of the leaders of a youth-led organization that acts nationally. And now I find myself in a position where I can bring along other young people with me, so they also have a place to take part in the conversation, to be able to access resources and spaces that otherwise they probably wouldn't. And that is crazy for me yet, because, yeah. So I think interacting climate justice to my work is for me now to, as we say in Portuguese, to abrir caminhos. That means roughly to open paths, and how this way of work produce change, because we add different perspectives to the work, and we add different experiences and narratives to the conversation, and then we are able to access different ways and different solutions to act upon it.
Great answers, everyone. Keeping it flowing here, Umazi, you and I are both here as delegates of We Are Family Foundation. That means that we are tasked with bringing youth perspective and trying to foster intergenerational collaboration in all of this climate work happening at COP28. In your words, to you, what is the unique youth perspective on climate justice, and why does it matter that the older generation, so well represented here, listen to that?
I think one thing that younger generations or younger people have is, and I hate to say it like this, but I feel like younger people see themselves in each other much more easily than older generations. For instance, I'm not sure if you've heard of this study where they put children in a room of different ages and backgrounds and racial, different races, and they couldn't tell the differences amongst each other. To them, they were all children, right? And so I feel like young people have a fresh, more innocent, less biased view in the world, and so we're able to call out things that don't make sense for us very easily. There's this, secondly, younger people have a courage and just this energy that, I guess as you grow older, life continues challenging it. And so because of that energy, we are able to power through and push for certain things. Most movements in this world that have brought significant systematic changes were run and led by young people. And so just looking at history and looking at where we are today, we have to continue to engage young people because of this energy and perspective that they bring into the world. However, it's also important for us to recognize that older generations have a wisdom of how the world works. And so I believe that we have to create spaces for balance. And right now it's a little bit more skewed towards the older generation, so we need them to skew a little bit more towards younger people to be able to effectively have this balance.
Amazing, and I hope you're all thinking on that one, because at the end, I'm going to ask a little bit more about what you want to say to the older folks in the audience, so think on that. But in the meantime, Larissa, with your experience directing a major youth-led climate organization, can you speak to an example or maybe several of direct results you've seen from the organizing that you all have done?
Yes, I was thinking about this a lot, and I came up with two examples. So the first one that I'm going to tell you is about a thing that we did during Bolsonaro's government. So a group of young activists from Brazil, several of them from Engajamundo, sued the government, precisely the environmental ministry, due to some tricky thing that they did that somehow altered the goals of Brazil's to the NDC on the Paris Agreement. So we were pushing that, and just before we got here, a deal was signed with the current government to retract and to reestablish Brazil's goal in the Paris Agreement that we already had to somehow deal with. So that is one example. And the other one is one that actually happened in here. And it was part of Brazilian youth movement organizing itself on different fronts. So a little bit of context. There is a city in Brazil that is facing a major problem due to an exploration that a company did 5 years ago. So 7 neighborhoods are on the major risk of crumbling down. Several communities and neighborhoods had to be evacuated due to this exploration that this company did because they caused a displacement of the ground, of the soil. And they had a panel in the Brazil Pavilion at COP this year. So the youth movements made several movements. One of them was speaking at panels like this. So volunteers of ours participated in 2, where she was speaking out about what Brascan did. Several other organizations did activism work, and somehow this pushed them to be embarrassed and not come, so they retracted their participation in the panel that they were supposed to have today. So I think that's it.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you and congratulations. That's fantastic. Moving over to you, Disha, I think something that comes through a lot in these conversations is that there's a lot of importance to establishing a collective youth voice, but youth as an identity intersects and kind of cuts into all other identity groups as well. So it's super diverse. And I think often as young people, when we do get access to these spaces, we feel sort of siloed into being the young person in the room. And I wonder if you can speak to how you strike the balance of bringing that collective youth voice and representing other young people at these big stages and in these big meetings, while also bringing your own unique identity and perspective.
I think this is actually quite an interesting question, because every time you're on a panel with a lot of adults, you're like the token youth. You're not seen as an expert, but you're there because you provide a perspective that they don't have. But at the same time, they won't respect that perspective, but they have to be there so that they can tick off a box. So it's always been very interesting because you're not taken as seriously, which is very annoying because all of us have done our homework. We've had to work very hard on our own without any support to get to these places and to speak the way we do, to learn all these things by ourselves. So it is very important for young people to take space at different tables. And there is space for more than just one young voice. When we are having these conversations, it's important to make the table longer so that we can include everyone. We can make it bigger. We can make it wider, because that's the only way we are going to collaborate. The most successful campaigns that I have been a part of are those where as many groups possible amplified it, and we're part of that campaign. So it's the same thing with climate justice. You don't need to have just one youth person representing the whole thing, which it's actually very unfair because there are a lot of disagreements within young people itself, like it should be, because we are a very vast and diverse group, and it's very necessary to fuel different conversations. So it's really important to not just have young people, but have diverse groups of young people and actually listen to us, and just don't invite us just because you can tick off a box.
Absolutely. And for Umazi, I have a really similar question, but actually on the topic of bringing climate justice into the room. There's a similar issue where if you're known and identified to be the climate justice person, if you're going to be the one who's always raising your hand, jumping in, calling for it, sometimes you can lose the power to actually get the work done. And so I'm wondering, are there rooms where you try to do that work quietly, or do you always wear your climate justice badge right on your shoulder? How do you approach that?
Sure. First of all, I believe that everything we do right now in alignment with rebalancing things is climate justice. I believe pretty much the structure of the world prior to industrial revolution had a much better appreciation of nature in that way. So I can say that my work is multiple folded because you're right. There's some spaces as young people, and I come from a country like Kenya, where just being very overt with the government can mean security issues for you. I've been in this quote-unquote activism, I hate it, but whatever, activism world for quite a while. And in my younger days, I had that energy, and I was just right, like I had that charge, and I burnt out very fast. And I didn't have anybody to guide me on, hey, you have to choose your battles. You have to pick and choose your strategy for each battle because not every chess game is the same. And I think that goes to your point, where there are some rooms where it makes sense for you to be very overt. Like Larissa said, I did the same thing with the Kenyan government. And I was like, this isn't making sense, right? And in that moment, I felt that was the strategy. However, there are some spaces where I would rather be on the ground. I feel like maybe empowering the community in certain ways is a better strategy, because then if most of us are united and empowered in certain ways, then we have a stronger voice and a more powerful impact. So, yeah.
Picking up on your little shrug at the word activism, which is something I'm sure we all go back and forth on a lot, we are all activists. We have all done the kind of the stuff you expect, holding the picket sign, going to the protest, showing up at the rally. That is absolutely part of it. But Disha, I know that you have thoughts on kind of a broader definition of what activism is and what it looks like. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that and speak to all the other forms that activism can take.
Okay, this is really funny because just today I heard from someone that they don't consider me an activist, and I'm just like, okay, good for you then. Because I would think I fit the role of being a typical activist because I work on ground and I hold the banners and the plugs and do protests, which is the idea of a typical activist. But I personally don't think activism is limited to organizing. It is very important to organize. I love organizing. It's what I do. But activism can be in the form of music. It can be in the form of art. It can be science. It is anything you do that amplifies a cause and impacts a cause positively. It's using your skills, and that could be really simple, like, drafting a press release. That's activism, because a lot of us don't know how to do that, and we had to learn all of this by ourselves. And a lot of activism work is not glamorous. It's very boring back-end work. It's getting permissions. It's making sure people are safe. It's just not. It's not just holding cards. While that is very important, we need people to be activists in their own way, in the sense that use your skills, use whatever you're good at, be it science, tech. We have a role for everybody in the movement. We want you here because we cannot solve this huge crisis without having everyone involved in some capacity. And it's okay if you don't like the word activist. You don't have to call yourself that. You can call yourself whatever. Just do good for our planet, because this is the only thing we share collectively.
On that theme of kind of entering with the skills you have, entering from where you are and figuring out your role in this, Larissa, I'm thinking of something that we've talked about a bit as well, which is that environmental injustice for some of us is something that we learn about in school or from the news or hearing about it from other people. It's a concept that might be new to some people who are here today, and it still remains quite abstract. For other people, environmental injustice, and therefore the fight for climate justice, is an everyday reality. It's a necessity, and it's something that can't be ignored. So I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to that difference, to these different forms of engagement, and how you see that in your work.
So yes, because when we hear climate conversation or environmental debates, usually this push our minds to a place that is very clinical, skeptical, experimental, sciencey thing. But actually, as Disha was saying, and also Umazi, and some part of what she brought in, when you're talking about climate, is a thing that we face on our day-to-day life. And when we're talking about climate crisis, is a reality that we are already facing. The thing is that we are not facing equally. So I'm going to bring examples again, because unfortunately, Brazil has a lot of devastating things happening all at once. So I have like several examples to bring in. So there is a city in the Amazon region that at some point this year became the second worst city in the entire world to breathe due to the wildfires inflicted by people doing deforestation in the Amazon region. And this produced a butterfly effect in the entire country, because you probably are not aware of this, but the Amazon region in Brazil is responsible for the rain that goes down in the southeast of the country, in big cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro and things like this. So at the same time, we were facing in the Amazon region drought due to the wildfires, and people in Manaus suffocating because of bad air quality. In the southeast, people were facing heat waves to extend to 60 degrees every day. But in these extreme events, people were not facing the consequences in the same way. So people in Manaus, the ones having to deal with the air pollution, the ones that had protection for the airways, were not everybody. People in the southeast facing the heat waves, who were the ones that had to face 60 degrees every day for several weeks, and who were the ones that were able to access air conditioners and not having to deal with the heat. So when we are talking about climate justice, when we're talking about the climate emergency we are facing and the work that we are doing, I think it is important to bring into the work the different perspectives and the different impacts that everyone face. And for sure is important the scientific part and the experimental, because these move us to some kind of conversation and some advantages. But we also have to take into consideration the lived experiences and how these groups, especially the vulnerable and marginalized groups, are thinking about strategies and solutions because they have to, because or else they don't remain standing. So how we combine these different views and these different ways to face the climate crisis, and we say it as it is, because this marginalized groups, they are also providing us with solutions for us to face the climate crisis. So how do we add that perspective to the conversation as well, and not only the scientific and the experimental thing? Yeah.
Absolutely. And that transitions really well into one of the last questions I want to pose to each of you. There's another after this, so stick with it. But one really important thing that comes through there is this question of how we're all engaging with COP28 and with this space and trying to bring perspective that we know really isn't getting represented here. We know that we are among few young people here at all. We're among an even fewer group of young people getting access to the blue zone, maybe to some meetings and to some stages that a lot of people don't have. So reflecting on that effort to bring more voices and more perspectives in and fight against a lot of the hegemonic views here that have gotten us into these problems and continue to bring climate injustice while we fight for climate justice. I'm wondering if you can each just reflect a bit, starting with you, Umazi, on how you found your COP28 experience as it's kind of approaching its end. Anything you found inspiring, frustrating, surprising, some combination? I'll let you go for it.
First of all, I want to recognize that I am blessed and privileged to be able to access COP. As you can see, I'm wearing my traditional wear. I come from the Duruma community, which is considered a minority community in Kenya. So just off me being here, I'm like one of hundreds of thousands, probably the only one representing, that's extreme, but one of very few, if not the only one representing my community, right? So I feel blessed in that way, but at the same time, I've been in rooms as an indigenous leader where we're currently the hot topic, right? So it feels good to bring in indigenous leaders in a very tokenism way. And I have done my best to push back and call that out because I believe that we're not a PR moment. As a young indigenous leader, I'm not a PR moment. However, I have met some of the most genuine, intentional people who are really about it, who are really ready for change, who want to push the needle forward. And that has mostly happened at the, I want to say, more local, calmer spaces, and not necessarily in like negotiation meetings and higher level. So my experience has been higher level is still very performative. We really need to push back on the performative stances that some of these higher level spaces have and really challenge them to come down, right? While at the same time, we need to embrace each other because I feel like a lot more of us want good for the planet, but we're just not as loud as we could be. So if we can continue to just harness this energy and just keep charging forward, that we'll be able to bring the system down.
Yes. Disha,
Can I be honest?
please.
I am so tired. I've barely slept. I have like 4 hours of sleep. I haven't eaten. So I think COP is very exhausting, and I'm horrified by the thought of bringing more people here because I've done that. In COP26, to indigenous leaders from India were here. I supported with them getting to Glasgow, and it was horrible for them. They came back and they told me they never want to go to COP again. It was a horrible experience. And this is what I've learned from a lot of other people who've come and it's their first COP and they haven't been in an international spaces. The space is now welcoming. It's huge. It's overwhelming. A lot of times in countries where there are a lot of restrictions, and first, it's incredibly expensive. I don't think it makes sense to get more youth voices into this space until we make it more accessible and safer for youth to be here. Like, okay, let's talk about just disability. No one's masking up, and COVID's running rampant. There are lots of activists who I work with and who, like, including me, that are immunocompromised, and there are no kits. There are no COVID testing kits at the medical center. It's very hard to buy them outside. This is a huge issue, and this is completely unacceptable. And this is just one of the many challenges of being at COP. And another very important thing, the language on climate negotiations is so complicated and is so inaccessible for young people. You have to learn all these new terms, and I mean, I don't know why the climate movement loves acronyms. There's an acronym for every single thing, but we have so many of them. Um, but the point is, it is done deliberately to keep young voices out of these conversations, out of these rooms, and out of negotiations. And I have a huge problem with the word negotiations. Like, you're not supposed to negotiate with our planet. It's not supposed to be a negotiation. To me, it's as simple as that. Like, it's not more nuanced. It isn't, because you can't negotiate with, like, nature. You can't. So until the space of COP becomes more accessible and welcoming to people, I'm not comfortable bringing people in every single time. And this is my second COP. I'm very grateful to be here and all of that, because I do use my time to do the work that my community has sent me to do. But I'm extremely tired, and by the second day, I'm like, why am I here? Why do I keep doing this to myself? And that's just the reality of the situation, because it's really hard to exist in this space. Because, like Umazi said, we've been screaming so loud, but we haven't been heard. And my initial response was, oh, maybe we should scream louder, until I realized that we're being deliberately silenced, even at COP, where it's supposed to be a summit on climate. And it's very exhausting to continue screaming to a bunch of people that don't care, especially a bunch of people that will let more than 2,000 fossil fuel lobbyists inside the venue use COP to make oil deals. So slowly, I am not so sure COP is living up to its name.
And I want to just quickly touch on a security and safety point that you made. I know I'm not the only one on this stage who spent time I should have spent preparing for my work, preparing for negotiations, in security briefings, and wondering how to present myself in what this experience would be like.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time doing that and not getting ready, and that's time that is lost because these aren't, taken seriously by the organizers and taken seriously from the beginning. And so I just wanted to carry on that point, and now you, Larissa.
But firstly, I want to applaud you because yes, please. Like, I think COP for everybody that is not, and I'm just tackling a thing that is one thing, but everybody that is not native English speaking, and it's just one thing. Being here is really, really hard, but there is one thing that I want to highlight because I'm really, really frustrated about this. And of course, I'm going to go back to my country because, yeah, a lot of things going on. Lula, that is the current president of Brazil, came to COP on the beginning of the first week, and he had a close meeting with Brazilian civil society. And on that meeting, he announced that Brazil would be entering, and I learned the acronyms of this in English because I learned that it's different in Portuguese by Camila. So Brazil joined in on the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus, because yes, they added a plus. That is, the acronym is OPEC Plus. And they join in under the excuse that these entries is to guide the oil countries towards the path of just transition. And this really makes me annoyed when we were so hopeful that this new government would lead us to a different direction. And they presented like it was a good thing, like we're being supportive and with solidarity. And yes, I'm really frustrated, as you perceived, about this. But I want to echo what Disha said. Like, this space is frustrating and it's really disappointing on most days. But there is a thing that I think is hopeful, because I like to see the glass half full. I think social movements and youth movements especially are really resilient. So the activism action, that is the part where we can be like joyful and happy and young, are the best thing about this space that I think I can highlight, because the creativity on how we can communicate on different ways the problems that we are facing are genius. So yeah, that's it.
That has been the bit of hope or the bit of optimism I felt as well. I think I've been paying a lot of attention to my emotional landscape and just how I'm feeling existing in this space at my first COP, and realizing that so much of the day is spent suited up, walking place to place, listening to a scientific meeting, trying to understand what's happening, trying to sound smart, make a contribution, make sure my points are made. And then there are these moments in between where I've attended youth panels or I've run into Umazi or whatever it is, just listening to other young people. I've realized a big distinction of what Youth Voice brings to these conferences, to these meetings, and to these landscapes, which is that we don't separate, we've never had the privilege to separate the climate crisis and climate injustice from our lives and from our work. We have grown up on a planet that we've known from the start has been at risk. Our futures are at stake, and we don't look at this as a profession. We don't look at it as something we close out at after 5 p.m. It's something that we're living every day. And I see us bridging our lived experiences, our relationships, how we connect with one another. There's a seamless connection to the work we're also all doing, which is big and important and real. And you know, these are 3 of my serious climate heroes I get to share the stage with. It's really true. And beyond that, though, it's friendly and it's engaged and it's emotional, and we lean on each other. And I think that's something the climate movement needs. It's something COP29 could surely use a lot more of. And with that in mind, starting with you, Larissa, these are closing thoughts. Message to the older generations listening: what does intergenerational collaboration look like? How can it take shape? What can they do to get real on it and really make it happen?
I think we have to start to listen to each other, because I think on this path to be heard, most of the times we are battling each other and trying to occupy the space of being able to speak. But as Disha said, there is room for everybody to speak their minds and to collaborate. So I think for us to move forward, we have to think more as collective, more on how can we support each other on the different kind of work we're doing, on the different levels that we are facing the things. Because if we keep battling each other, the big corporations, the oil countries, they are going to continue doing what they're doing because they are aligned, we are not. So how can we move towards an alliance that maybe perhaps with all the different aspects that we have to add to this conversation, we can reach to a place where we finally agree on something that is to move to phase out, that is to do things that are very simple, but somehow we are still struggling with this because we are worried about political aspects to it, because we are worried about gains that we can have through it, being individually or being as a country, because somehow it's now cool to say that you are in a climate movement. But this is serious things that we are talking about. So we have to take it serious and we have to unite ourselves. So I think that's it.
Disha?
Yeah, I was so surprised when the climate movement suddenly became cool, because before it wasn't cool. I even
Not
saw
at
a
all.
meme where someone apparently dressed up as a climate activist to give out pamphlets because they wanted to disguise themselves, and they were like, oh, now no one will notice me because they're an environmental activist. I think for me, for the older activists, it's really, really important to share resources, because the people we're fighting against have tens of billions of dollars. They're the most resourceful people in the world, and it's really, really important to unite against that. We cannot waste time fighting amongst ourselves. That's time we just don't have. So share network, share resources, share your knowledge, share tech. whatever. It's just really important for there to be a community where you recognize and value our input and, yeah, like I said, share resources because we have so little. And from that, we hardly, like the youth movement gets peanuts, and it's really, really important for us to unite and have some resources so that we can continue the work we do, so that we can fight against the most resourceful people in the world. Yeah.
And to close us off, Umazi.
Um, my feedback is I want to challenge the older generation to see themselves in us, right? Because we are you. You are us, right? There's no difference except that you've had a little bit more time than us on this planet. And I want to bring it back to my kaya. In my kaya, I am the youngest leader in the youth council, right? Most people who are elders are much, much older. But then my kaya recognizes my input being very, very important. I have had access to the world in ways that many members haven't had. So I bring a perspective that is very, very useful in some of the projects we're trying to do. For instance, as a way to combat illegal deforestation, we are piloting oyster farming on mangrove roots because they have a symbiotic relationship. So this is a way in which we can help the community view conservation in very real ways that make sense to them, right? And the reason why that is the case is because the elders see themselves in me. And for me, I have to be humble enough because young people, we're like, we know it all, burn the system. Um, we tend to kind of refuse to also listen to the older generation because, I mean, rightly so, they have disappointed us in various ways, but they are still us, they're still human beings, they make mistakes, and I want to believe that they're trying to do the best to correct the mistakes. And so I listen to my elders. For me to be able to come here to COP, we had to ask the land for permission. Hey, first of all, can we pilot this oyster farming project on the land? The land said yes. I do not know how to communicate with the land because that's something that comes with years of experience. But then through the elders, I was able to communicate with the land to receive the permission to even come and represent the Kaya here. So I just want to finish by saying that we are all relevant and important in this world. Young, old, babies, the unborn, the ancestors, those who've come before us, those who have left, we all have a key role to play. And it all just starts by us being intentional, mindful, and aware that we are all connected. And I think biologically 99, please do not quote me, but I think we're like 99.7% genetically similar as human beings, I think. But it's a very high percent, right? And like literally the differences that you physically see are like 0.03 or something. What does that tell you?
They're cooler than us. I'm so sorry.
And yeah, on that note, yeah. Anyway, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.